Hi everyone, Jessica Pock again from Mirror Lake. Thanks for joining us. Today I have a morning message for you, and I want you to take a look at the underlined words and see if you notice anything about them. They might have something in common, and I wonder if you'll notice that right away. Here it is. I woke up quickly this morning because my stomach was grumbling loudly. I skipped excitedly to the kitchen to find breakfast made already. Yum. Breakfast is one of my favorite meals. But take a look at the underlined words there. Quickly, loudly, excitedly. Do you notice anything about those words? Give you some think time. What do you notice about those words? If you were like me, I notice, hey, they all end in ly. Did you see that too? Quickly, loudly, excitedly. Did you notice that? Awesome. Those words are called adverbs. With an ly added at the end of those words, it tells me how or how much. So let's take a look at that again. How did I wake up? I woke up quickly. That tells me how I woke up. Then my stomach grumbled how? Loudly. That's right. With that ly added to the word loud, that now tells me how or how much. And then how did I skip to the kitchen? I skipped excitedly. So just adding that ly, that adverb or suffix that comes at the end of that word, that tells me how or how much. So let's take a look at the target for today. Remember, that's our goal when we're reading. It's always nice to have something to keep in mind in your brain. I will look for the suffix ly in a text or write it in my own sentence. Again, just to be clear there, an adverb, ly, means how or how much. For example, how does she run? She runs quickly. See that word quickly again? With the adverb ly, that tells me how she ran. So let's look for this and keep this in our brain while we're reading today. All right, I have the book, If a Bus Could Talk, The Story of Rosa Parks by Faith Ringgold. If you joined us yesterday, we read halfway through this story. One thing good readers can and should do is always go back to the text a couple pages or so to refresh their memory on what happened. Because sometimes you don't finish a book in one day. I know I don't always finish reading a whole book in one day. So to refresh your memory, this is where we left off yesterday. Rosa Parks, this is probably mostly known what she's known for. She got arrested because she was brave and did not give up her seat for a white man. So I'm going to just reread this part, which we did finish off yesterday. When Mrs. Parks refused to give up her seat, Blake called the police and had her arrested and taken to jail for breaking the segregation laws. It is for this singular act of courage that one day a year, Mrs. Parks' seat has been reserved, said the talking bus. And why we don't want to see Blake driving this bus ever again. Amen, amen, chorused the passengers. How long did Mrs. Parks have to stay in jail, I asked. Not long, Marcy. When Mr. E.D. Nixon had heard the head of the Montgomery branch of the NAACP heard of Mrs. Parks' arrest, he paid her bail and she was released. He asked her to help with a boycott to change the segregation laws. A boycott is giving something up, and you'll see what happens with that. Rosa was happy to be a part of a citywide effort to end segregated buses. Mr. E.D. Nixon also asked the Women's Political Council and the town's Black ministers to help organize and promote what came to be known the world over as the Montgomery bus boycott. Maybe you've heard of that. Hey, he might be familiar. One of the ministers was the pastor at the Dexter Avenue Baptist Church, a young man named, did you guess it? Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Mr. E.D. Nixon asked him to lead the boycott because he was new to the town and had great promise. The Dexter Avenue Baptist Church drew a large crowd the night Dr. King told the people about the boycott. This was the beginning of Dr. King's leadership in the civil rights movement and the beginning of his many memorable speeches. On this day, Dr. King said, we are tired of being segregated and humiliated, tired of being kicked about by the brutal feet of oppression. Now, I'm trying to keep in mind the suffixes ly. Remember, that adverb tells me how we did something. But I haven't noticed any yet, but we'll keep an eye out for that. For 381 days, more than a year, Black people in Montgomery either walked or arranged their own carpools instead of taking the buses. Without the Black passengers, the buses were almost empty and the city lost a lot of money. The Montgomery bus boycott was working. Amen, amen, said the passengers. We know, we were there. But as a result of the boycott, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was arrested and his home was bombed. Many others were arrested too and threatened with hateful letters, phone calls, and bombings. The Montgomery bus boycott was the beginning of a national movement in which people of every race organized protests against segregation in their own towns. The boycott spread to department stores where Black people were not allowed to return articles of clothing they had bought or to try on clothes before buying them. You mean Miss Rosa could not try on a pair of shoes or return a dress that did not fit? I asked. Yes, Marcy. I know it's difficult for young people today to understand what life under the segregation laws was really like. There were Edens, too, where Black people and white sympathizers would sit at for whites only lunch counters and have food poured over their heads by the hissing crowds. That sign says swimming for whites only. But there was no sadder sight on a hot summer day than Black children outside a public swimming pool displaying a for whites only sign. Remember that it's okay to feel sad or angry or helpless right now while you're reading something. It's important to learn about and know about our history so we can make sure that this doesn't happen again. Mrs. Parks' case finally reached the highest court in our land, and on November 13th, 1956, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that the segregation on public buses was against the law. A little more than a month later, the boycott ended. Black people no longer had to ride in the back of the bus, but the struggle for equal rights was not over. Rosa lost her $25 a week job at the Montgomery Fair department store, and she continued to receive threatening phone calls and letters. A year later, Rosa and Raymond Parks moved to Detroit, where Rosa worked for Congressman John Conyers of Michigan. There, she was able to help homeless people find decent housing, jobs, and community services. Man, I admire Miss Rosa Parks. She is something called perseverance. She is not giving up, even though she is facing so many struggles, and she's not stopping there. She keeps on trying to help others. Mrs. Parks' struggle for equal rights continued. On August 28, 1963, at Dr. King's March on Washington, Rosa Parks was honored with a Tribute to Women award by A. Philip Randolph. However, she was not asked to speak. And later, when she heard on the radio that Dr. King had been shot, Rosa wept in her mother's arms. Many tributes and awards have been given to this gentle, courageous woman. A bronze bust of Mrs. Parks is installed at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. She was awarded the Spingarn Medal, the Martin Luther King Jr. Nonviolent Peace Prize, the Eleanor Roosevelt Woman of Courage Award, and the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Mrs. Parks has received countless honorary degrees, plaques, and honors for her valiant act of courage and unceasing dedication of freedom. But what this old bus is proudest of is that Cleveland Avenue, the street this bus ran on, has been renamed Rosa Parks Boulevard. That's pretty cool. In addition to all this, once a year we get together to celebrate the great lady's birthday. Amen, amen, said the passengers. We know, we were there. And just like that, the bus stopped and Mrs. Parks herself got on. All the passengers stood up to meet her. And when she greeted them by name, Parks, Edie Nixon, Dr. King, and the rest, I remembered them from her story. The once unfamiliar passengers now had faces I would never forget. I was so excited to meet you, Mrs. Parks, I said gleefully. You really are the mother of the civil rights movement, and I am so lucky to be here. May I ask what gave you such a strong belief in freedom? My belief in freedom goes way back to the days when my mother used to sing the old Negro spiritual, "Oh, freedom over me," said Mrs. Parks. Let's sing it together. Instead of me singing it, you're welcome. Here's a clip.
Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Now it's time for you to cut your birthday cake, Mrs. Parks, said the talking bus. Mrs. Parks closed her eyes, drew a deep breath, and blew out all the candles. Hey, guess what? I see the suffix for the adverb. Do you see it too up there? I see the word gleefully. How did she say something? She said it gleefully. It tells me how or how much with that suffix ly at the very end. And gleefully means very happy or excited. Happy birthday, Mrs. Parks, said the passengers. And may your dreams of freedom and equal opportunity for all people come true. We love you and we thank you for being the lady who, by sitting down, inspired people all over the world to stand up for freedom. Amen, amen. We know we were there. By the time the talking bus reached my school, my head was crammed full of all the things that had happened. When I got up this morning, little did I know that I would be attending Mrs. Parks' birthday party on the very bus she was arrested on. I can't wait to tell my class about this. What a great, inspiring story about Rosa Parks. Even if you knew about her, it's nice to refresh your memory through a different story, like a book like that. Here's what we were supposed to do while we were reading, and we found one, and that's okay. But I have a different challenge for you since we didn't find too many suffixes in there. Remember, our job was to look for the suffix ly in a text or write it in my own sentence. Remember that adverb ly means how or how much. So for example, how does she run? She runs quickly. Adding that ly to the word quick tells you how or how much. So since we weren't able to find a ton in the book, and that's okay when you're reading, not all stories will have what you're looking for all the time, but that's okay. We can create our own. So let's add our own ly adverbs to describe how or how much. So here's some examples. How does she run? If you're writing this down, you can go ahead and write these in complete sentences. I always like to tell my students to try and do it in complete sentences instead of just one word like I did. So how does she run? She runs quickly. That's adding the ly. Or if you're talking about Miss Pak, how does she run? She runs slowly. Or you could even add, she runs very slowly. That's another ly adverb that you're adding to it. And this is definitely not Miss Pak. How does she run? She runs extremely fast. Notice that extremely is still describing how or how much, how she's running. So that other person, not me, she is running extremely fast. That means supersonic speed. So remember that you can add in, and there's so many more adverbs there. Hungrily is a different one, and slowly, and sleepily. There's a bunch of different words. I would suggest maybe trying that out yourself in different sentences and be on the lookout for those different ly words. Awesome job doing that with me today. So remember, when we finish a book, we always want to try and do a SWIBS, which is, say it with me, somebody in, wanted but so. I have students chant that sometimes. If you're just tuning in, though, somebody is always about the main character of the story. In is the setting. Wanted is the motivation. What did the main character want? But is the problem. And so is the solution. How does that problem get solved? So we've done this a couple times. We did it yesterday with the halfway through this story to check our comprehension, checking, do we understand what's happening so far? And I have this done for you guys. You're welcome. But think of the main character. Who do you think the main character was in that story? I hope you said Rosa Parks. I know there were other characters in that story, but she was definitely the main one. And in, remember, you can always go back to the text. It's not cheating if you do. They were in the state Alabama. And what did she want? So I kind of generalized this one because she wanted a lot of things. Let's take a look here. So the somebody was, Rosa Parks in Alabama. And what did she want here? She wanted everyone to have equal rights. I know she wanted a lot of different things, but I'm just, again, being kind of general for this one. But, so again, that's the problem in the story. And I know she faced a lot of problems in that story, but we wanted to try and narrow it down to the one main one. So I did a general one saying not everyone agreed with her. And if you were doing this on your own, this does not mean this is the only right answer. There's a lot of different ones you can be a lot more specific to if you'd like. And then the so, how did that problem up there get solved? Well, unfortunately, it didn't get solved completely. And sometimes that happens, but we take baby steps. So she had to remain brave and perseverant, which we all are, and I hope that you continue to be, and inspired others to do the same. So because she did one act of bravery, which was staying in her seat and refusing to give it up, even though she was arrested, and despite all those things, she stayed her ground, and she inspired so many other people to do the same. So again, if you had a graphic organizer like this, again, the somebody in, wanted but so, now we can write that. Miss Pak likes complete sentences, writing it all in one kind of almost giant paragraph. So let's read that together. So somebody in, wanted but so. Rosa Parks in Alabama wanted everyone to have equal rights, but not everyone agreed with her. So she had to remain brave and perseverant and inspired others to do the same. Awesome job. Thank you for doing that with me today. Man, we've read so many stories, and if you have more questions, I would really recommend talking to a trusted adult. Have a great day.
Hey, welcome back, third grade mathematicians and families and any other watchers out there. I appreciate you joining me again today. We are going to continue exploring division, and that's what we started talking about yesterday. So just a reminder about what division means. It is just taking a total amount and splitting it up into equal groups. And then ways to kind of remember what it means and what it's all about. Think about sharing fairly. And then one example of when we might use division in our lives is like dealing cards for a game, dealing out a total amount of cards so that each person in playing gets the same amount of cards. So putting the cards into smaller groups. And that's all division really is. And I realized yesterday I probably could have shown some more pictures to help you think about division. So today I drew a picture that I was thinking about, just to help us think a little bit more about what it really means and what it looks like when we divide. So here's a plate with cookies on it. I'm not the best artist, so just bear with me. But in my picture, I felt like this is showing what division looks like because you have a total amount of cookies on the plate. There are 6 cookies on the plate. And if 3 friends wanted to share those cookies, 1, 2, 3, then if they were sharing them equally or fairly, so each person got the same number of cookies, they would each end up with 2 cookies for each person sharing. So I just thought that was a helpful picture to help us remember what division means and what it can look like in our lives. So just to review what we learned last time in our lesson yesterday was thinking about how we can read a division equation, and then also how we can draw a picture of equal groups or an array to solve a division problem or equation. So on this little chart here, this was the equation that I was using as our example to think about. 10 divided by 2 equals 5. I was giving a situation example of sharing a snack with my daughter and having 10 pieces of cereal to share equally between the 2 of us. And so in this chart here, it just reminds you this is how we would read that equation in words. So we would say 10 divided into 2 equal groups equals 5 in each group. And that's one way we could read that division equation. And here's a little picture, an array that I drew with some hearts to show that if I wanted to draw a total of 10 hearts in an array and have 2 equal rows, there would be 5 hearts in each row. So that's just a quick review on what we learned in our last lesson. So today, when we practice division, we are going to use a strategy called repeated subtraction to divide. So just a reminder about what subtraction means in math. You might also know it as takeaway, or sometimes we might say 12 minus 3. So subtracting is just where we're taking one number away from another. We're taking some away from a total. So in this little example down here, I'm just showing that if we did 12 and subtracted 3 and took 3 away, we would end up with 9. And my little array, I just have 3 of the dots crossed off to show that there would be 9 left. So that is subtraction, just a review of what that means. And when we use repeated subtraction, just like with repeated addition in multiplication, we're subtracting equal groups from the total over and over until we get to 0. With repeated addition and multiplication, we were adding a number to itself over and over until we got a total. So hopefully you're starting to think about how multiplication and division are connected, and they're actually opposite of each other. So we call that inverse operations in math. Kind of like adding and subtracting are opposite. Adding, we're putting numbers together. When we're subtracting, we're taking something away from another number. When we multiply, we're taking equal groups and putting them together. So I was thinking today about how we could use our hands to remind us about multiplying and dividing. Multiplication means taking equal groups and putting them together. Division, which is what we're coming back to today, means taking a total and splitting it apart into equal groups. So using our hands can kind of be helpful for remembering what those operations mean. So today, again, our learning target is that we're going to use repeated subtraction or takeaway to solve a division problem. So just like yesterday when I did a little visual demonstration of what division looks like, and I took the cereal and divided it into 2 piles, I just wanted to do a quick demonstration with some toothpicks to kind of show what repeated subtraction looks like if we were doing it with real objects and dividing a total of something into equal groups. So here I have 10 toothpicks. And if I was looking at a problem like yesterday's equation, which was 10 divided by 2, I could think about how if I took away 2 toothpicks, groups of 2 from the total, how many groups of 2 could I take away? So here's one group of 2 that I just took away from the 10 toothpicks. And then here's another group of 2. Whoops. Here's a third group of 2. So now I have 3 groups of 2. Here's another group of 2 I can take away. And one more group of 2 from my total. So there's all the toothpicks divided up. And as I took away groups of 2, I can see that I end up with 5 groups of 2, 5 equal groups of 2. So I had 10 altogether divided into groups of 2, and I ended up with 5. That's just a little visual example to show you what it would look like. So here we have our whiteboard, and reminding you of our learning target today, which is that we will hopefully be able to use repeated subtraction as a strategy to solve a division problem today. And how you know you can do that, the way you show and prove that you're able to do that is you will subtract equal groups from a total until you get to 0. And then you can count the number of groups you subtracted or took away to figure out your answer, which I'm going to teach a new vocabulary word today. And that word is quotient. So you see that word here on the screen, and I also added it down below in purple to our word wall. The quotient is just what we call the answer to our division problems. Other words to remind you about that are important to know: what division means, splitting up a total into equal groups, equal being the same amount, same number. Equation, remember, is what we call a number sentence with an equal sign, and I have an example here. And equations are the types of number sentences we've been working with. An array, here's an example of an array, is a picture that shows equal groups in rows and columns. And then other numbers in our division equation, we also give special names to. So here's an example division equation: 10 divided by 2 equals 5. We've worked with this equation, and I'm just using it to show you what we call each of the numbers in that equation. So as I mentioned before, the quotient is what we call the answer, or the number that comes after the equal sign. And there's also a name for the number we are dividing by, or the number we're dividing the total into. And so in this case, 2 would be our divisor because we're dividing the total by 2. And that total that we start with in a division equation is called the dividend. It's okay if you don't remember all of these new words today, but just so you can start becoming familiar with what we call those numbers in a division equation. So the problem that I want to use as an example for how to use repeated subtraction to solve a division equation is on the screen here. 16 divided by 4 is what we're going to think about. So hopefully you're kind of picturing if we had 16 total something and we wanted to divide that either into groups of 4 or into 4 equal groups. How many would be in each group? And so we can think about last time when we were drawing pictures, what kind of a picture we could draw. But today we're going to apply this new strategy, repeated subtraction. So we always start with the total. That's the number we're going to be subtracting from. So down below here, I'm going to show my work for when I start subtracting. I'm going to take 16. And then you look at your other number in your equation, and that's how you know what you're subtracting groups of from your total. So in this case, we're going to take away groups of 4. We're going to subtract 4. And we're going to keep taking away 4 until we get to 0. So I had 16 as my total. And if I took 4 away, that would equal 12. I'm going to take another group of 4 away from 12. And that would leave me with 8. If I take another group of 4 away, whoops, I'm running out of room, that would equal 4. And if I take one more group of 4 away, 4 take away 4, we know we would end up with 0. And the way we figure out our answer is by counting how many 4s we had to subtract from 16. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4 4s that we took away from 16. So if we have 4 groups of 4 that we can take away from 16, then that means our answer to 16 divided by 4 is equal to 4. So just to show what that repeated subtraction could look like on our whiteboard on a number line, this is just doing the same thing I just did, except using a number line to show it. So if I had 16 as a total, I'm thinking about with subtraction that I would be jumping backwards down the number line to 0, and I'm gonna jumping backwards by 4, so taking away 4 each time. So starting at 16, if I took 4 away from that, that gets me to 12. If I jump backwards 4 more, take 4 more away, that gets me to 8. If I were to jump backwards 4 more again, take 4 away from 8, that gets me to 4. And then my last group of 4, I subtract, gets me to 0. So that's just another way to show you on a number line what the repeated subtraction we did to solve this equation looks like. And again, we get that same answer, 16 divided by 4 equals 4. Ready to try using repeated subtraction to solve a division equation on your own? I hope so, because it's your turn. So look at the equation on the whiteboard, 15 divided by 3, and go ahead and try using repeated subtraction to solve. You can use paper and pencil, or if you have any objects lying around the house like paper clips that you have 15 of and you can model with an object, that's okay too. Do your best, and we'll talk about the answer in a moment. On solving 15 divided by 3 using repeated subtraction. Here is what the answer should be. So hopefully you figured out that we can take away 5 groups of 3 from 15, or that there are 5 groups of 3 that make up a total of 15. On my whiteboard here, I'm showing 2 ways you could have thought about it with subtraction. And we can see that we would take away 3 5 times from 15 to get to 0. So check your work, see how you did, and give yourself a high five if you got it right. Yesterday, by showing the array that we could draw to try to solve this equation. So I'm just drawing rows of 3 and counting in my head until I get to 15. And after I do that, hopefully you can see that we have 5 rows of 3 in an array showing 15 dots altogether. So just a way to connect what we did yesterday to today's learning. So here are some equations you can try on your own for more practice, just to make sure you're feeling confident with using repeated subtraction as a strategy to divide. All right, that was all for today. Thanks again for joining me for some exploration with division and using repeated subtraction as a strategy to divide. Next time, we will practice using skip counting as a division strategy.
Hola niñas y niños, de nuevo soy yo, la maestra Lorena Vázquez, y estoy tan contenta que estén aquí conmigo acompañándome para aprender sobre las matemáticas. Como ya saben, esta semana nos estamos enfocando en la división. Y si recuerdan muy bien de la lección de ayer, división quiere decir separar en grupos iguales. Curiosamente, eso viene siendo lo opuesto de la multiplicación, que es combinar grupos iguales. ¿Están listos para empezar nuestro día? Muy bien, vamos a empezar. Recuerden, tengan su trabajo de ayer listo, su pizarra, hoja, papel, marcador, todo lo que necesiten para tener éxito conmigo el día de hoy. Hola niños y niñas, como les dije, ayer aprendimos sobre la división y sabemos que la división es la operación inversa o lo opuesto de multiplicación. Así como multiplicar quiere decir combinar grupos, división quiere decir separar grupos iguales. Entonces, las 4 formas de representar la división eran sustracción repetida, grupos iguales, una matriz y una ecuación. Ayer nos enfocamos en sustracción repetida. Entonces, vamos a repasar lo que les dejé encargado de tarea y luego nos vamos a concentrar en la siguiente estrategia que son grupos iguales. ¿Listos? Ok. Aquí tenemos. Entonces les dije que tenían que resolverme para practicar 12 dividido por 4. Espero que hayan tenido la oportunidad de hacerlo. Entonces, muy bien. 12 dividido por 4. A mí cuando hace calor me gusta salir a caminar, así que yo elegí las florecitas para una guía visual. Cuando estamos restando, tenemos que restar la cantidad de grupos repetidamente. Entonces, 12. Empezamos. 12. Si le quitamos aquí 4, 12 menos 4 son 8. Entonces, igual aquí, 1, 2, 3, 4. ¿Ya terminé? No, aún me quedan florecitas, entonces vamos a continuar. Seguimos con 12 menos 4 son 8. Quitamos otro grupo de 4, otras 4 florecitas. 1, 2, 3, 4. Y podemos ver aquí que nos quedan 4. ¿Ya terminamos? No, tenemos que sustraer o restar o quitar hasta llegar a 0. Entonces, vamos a bajar esto por aquí. 4. Ahora tenemos que volver a quitar otros 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Y llegamos por fin a 0. Entonces, 12 dividido por 4 son... Ay, tengo muchas tachas aquí. Resté, llegué a 0. ¿Ahora qué? Lo que tienen que hacer es contar cuántas veces restaron 4. Vamos a contar. 1, 2, 3. Entonces, 12 dividido por 4 son 3. Si tu respuesta fue 3, bravo, lo hiciste correctamente. Y si no, puedes volver a ver este video o hacer otro ejemplo y practicar. No pasa nada. Seguimos. Así que el día de hoy, primeramente, bienvenidos otra vez. Estamos aprendiendo a dividir compartiendo en grupos iguales. Y para tener éxito en esto, vamos a repartir la cantidad del dividendo equitativamente. Ahí está esa palabra de nuevo. ¿Pueden decirla conmigo? Equitativamente. Todo junto, equitativamente. Eso quiere decir que vamos a repartir el dividendo en partes iguales. Porque para compartir, a mí me gusta que compartan conmigo y que sean justos. No es justo que su mamá les compre un dulce a uno de ustedes y si tienen hermanos o primos o familiares, ellos obtengan más. No se siente muy bien. Así que al dividir tampoco es lo mismo. Cuando ustedes escuchen que yo diga la palabra equitativamente, quiero que piensen que eso significa repartir en grupos iguales, la misma cantidad. Entonces, vean esto, equitativamente.
Equitativamente.
3 para ti, 3 para ti. ¿Ya vieron cómo funciona? Se los voy a ir recordando a través del video para que no se les olvide. Y como siempre necesitan lápiz o papel, pizarra con marcador y quizás algunas cosas para contar que tengan alrededor de sus casas. Vamos a ver. Ok, otra vez, división, sustracción repetida, grupos iguales, matriz, ecuación. 4 maneras de representar. Hoy nos enfocaremos en esta, grupos iguales. Vamos a ir a nuestro primer ejemplo. El primer ejemplo lo tenemos aquí. Vamos a repartir o compartir 8 entre 4. 4 partes iguales. Para hacer eso, lo más fácil que yo sé hacer es primeramente dibujar esos grupos. Así yo sé dónde repartir las cosas. Vamos a ver. 2, 3 y 4. Así nos aseguramos que estemos dividiendo equitativamente.
Equitativamente. 3 para ti, 3 para ti.
Eso es, cada quien partes iguales. Muy bien, ¿con qué empezaremos? ¿Qué tal las paletas? Si tenemos 4 grupos, empezamos con el dividendo, que es este, y lo repartimos equitativamente.
Equitativamente. 3 para ti, 3 para ti.
Vamos a ver. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ahora, niños, ¿todos tienen la misma cantidad de paletas? ¿Todos los grupos? Sí, todos son iguales. En veces a mí me ayuda a pensarlo y contarlo así. 1 para ti, 1 para ti, 1 para ti y 1 para ti. Pero lo importante es que tienen que ir contando porque dejan de repartir cuando lleguen al total, a 8. Ahorita tenemos 1, 2, 3, 4, así que necesitamos agregar 5, 6, 7 y 8. En este caso tenemos 1, 2 paletas, 1, 2 paletas, 1, 2, 1, 2 en cada grupo. Así que la respuesta es 2. 8 dividido por 4 es o son 2. Cada grupo recibe 2 paletas. Muy bien. Vamos a compararlo con 8 dividido por 2. Vamos a voltear los números a ver qué pasa. Así que lo primero que yo voy a hacer es hacer 2 grupos. A ver, entonces, 1, 2. Quiero mostrarles cómo lo dibujarían ustedes en casa. Muy bien. 8 dividido por 2. Entonces voy a empezar a repartir igualmente o equitativamente.
Equitativamente. 3 para ti, 3 para ti.
Eso es, la misma cantidad. Entonces empiezo. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Sé que tengo que detenerme ahí porque 8 es nuestro dividendo y es nuestro total. ¿Y vieron cómo rápidamente dibujé los puntitos? No necesitan tener dibujos especiales para poder resolver el problema. Así que, ¿cuántos les tocó a cada grupo, niños y niñas? A este grupo número 1 les tocó 1, 2, 3 y 4. Y a este 1, 2, 3 y 4. Quiere decir que 8 dividido por 2 son 4. ¿Vieron qué fácil es? Ustedes también pueden hacerlo en casa. Por cierto, aquí tienen. Para mañana, quiero que practiquen con sus seres queridos usando sus lápices y papel, sus tableros, sus marcadores o frijolitos o piedritas, lo que ustedes quieran. Todo se puede dividir equitativamente.
Equitativamente. 3 para ti, 3 para ti.
Claro, con partes iguales, ¿verdad? Porque recuerden, para compartir es justo hacer que todos tengan la misma cantidad para que nadie se sienta mal. Entonces, también pueden dividir y practicar cuando tengan algo que compartir con sus seres queridos. El primer problema que quiero que intenten es este. 12 dividido por 4. Y ya les empecé con la primera pista. Pueden dibujar 4 grupos, pero ¿cómo saben cuánto les quedaría en cada grupo? Recuerden, el dividendo es su total, este de aquí. Entonces, no se pueden pasar de ese número de 12. Y recuerden que tienen que compartir o repartir equitativamente.
Equitativamente.
3 para ti, 3 para ti. Así es, la misma cantidad por grupo. Entonces, empezaríamos con el 12 con 1. 1, 2, 3, 4. Regresamos al primero. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Y así pueden ver cuánto les tocó a cada uno. ¿Qué cantidad? 12 dividido por 4 es el primero y el segundo, que no les voy a ayudar nada, similar, 24 dividido por 4. Veremos, ¿hay una diferencia entre los resultados? Mañana sabremos. Muy bien. Bueno, niños y niñas, vamos a tomar una pequeña pausa antes de terminar el día de hoy para hacer un repaso. Ya tenemos más de una semana estudiando y creo que es importante detenernos aquí y hacer un pequeño repaso para asegurarnos de que estemos aprendiendo el vocabulario que hemos estado estudiando. Así que vamos a comenzar con un pequeño jueguito y a ver si ustedes están listos y pueden acertar qué representan estas imágenes que están viendo aquí con en estas tarjetas. Así que vamos a comenzar. Vemos que aquí hay una foto de 2 manos con 3 uvas en cada mano. Creo que lo han visto en mis lecciones. A ver, aquí tenemos 6 dividido por 3 igual a 2 y una flechita hacia el número 3. ¿Qué representa este número 3? Aquí tenemos 3 por 2 es igual a 6. 3 por 2, ¿qué es esto? ¿Cómo se llama esto? Aquí tenemos 6 dividido en 3 igual a 2. Y miren, 6 menos 3 igual a 3, menos 3 igual a 0. ¿Qué hago? De nuevo y de nuevo. ¿Cómo se llama eso? Y aquí vemos 6 deliciosas galletitas, bien ordenaditas, por cierto. ¿Cómo se llama eso? Espero que estén pensando. Aquí tenemos 3 grupos de gomitas, osos rojos. 3. ¿Qué podría ser? Y aquí tenemos una flechita apuntando hacia el 2. 6 dividido por 3 igual a 2. ¿Cómo se llama? Este. Y el último, la flechita apuntando al 6. 6 dividido por 3 igual a 2. Piensen. Todo esto hemos repasado ya sea ayer, hoy o la semana pasada. Entonces van a tener que pensar muy bien qué es lo que está representado en cada tarjeta. ¿Listos? Está bien. Vamos a comenzar con esta. La primera es 3 uvas aquí en estas manos y 3 uvas aquí. ¿Recuerdan cómo se llama eso? Vamos a ver. Equitativamente. Quiere decir que las dos cantidades son iguales. Si esa fue tu respuesta, acertaste. Vamos a ver, ¿con qué seguimos? ¿Qué tal esta? 6 dividido en 3 igual a 2. En esta ecuación, ¿el 2 qué representa? Representa el cociente, o sea, la cantidad para cada parte. Es la respuesta. Muy bien. Una facilita de la semana pasada. ¿Cómo se llama esto? 3 por 2 igual a 6. Vamos a ver. Ecuación de multiplicación. Si esa fue tu respuesta, muy bien. Estás acertando muchas preguntas. A ver, seguimos por aquí. Aquí, el 3. ¿Qué representa este 3? Veremos. Sí, se llama divisor. A ver, otra facilita. ¿Qué tal estas gomitas, los ositos? Vamos a ver. Grupos iguales, claro, cada círculo tiene 2 gomitas, pero si tu respuesta fue 3 por 2, muy bien, grupos iguales. A ver, ¿con cuál seguimos? ¿Qué tal esta? Aquí tenemos la flechita apuntando al 6. 6 dividido por 3 igual a 2. ¿Qué representa el número 6 en esta ecuación? Vamos a ver. Se llama dividendo. Dividendo es el total. Siempre tenemos que empezar con el dividendo porque si no, no sabemos cuánto vamos a repartir equitativamente. Entonces es muy importante cuando dividimos empezar con el total o dividendo. Nos quedan 2 más, galletitas o esta. Me voy a ir por esta de aquí arriba. Vamos a ver. Veo que está iluminado el 3 2 veces. Veo este 2 del mismo color. ¿Qué está pasando aquí? Algo pasa una y otra vez. Sustracción repetida. Muy bien. Es una de las estrategias para dividir. Podemos restar repetidamente hasta encontrar la respuesta. Y vamos a terminar por último aquí con las 6 galletitas, que por cierto las vemos muy ordenaditas. ¿Cómo se llama cuando ordenamos cosas en filas y columnas? ¿Cómo se llama? A ver. Matriz, muy bien. Si esa fue tu respuesta, buen trabajo. También si tu respuesta fue 2 por 3, excelente, porque tenemos 2 grupos de a 3 cada uno. Muy bien. Niños y niñas, muy buen repaso. Ahora vamos a terminar nuestra lección. Bueno, niños y niñas, llegamos al final de nuestra lección. Ahora, nuestra meta de hoy era, estoy aprendiendo a dividir compartiendo en grupos iguales. Recuerdan, los grupos tenían que ser de la misma cantidad, si no, no funcionaba. Puedo repartir la cantidad del dividendo. ¿Recuerdan lo que es el dividendo? El dividendo era el total equitativamente.
Equitativamente.
3 para ti, 3 para ti. Así es, la misma cantidad. Mañana continuaremos con división aprendiendo sobre la matriz y cómo se compara con la multiplicación. Me da gusto que me hayan acompañado y nos vemos mañana. Hasta la próxima.